Thank you for joining us. This weekly public affairs TV show has been on the air continuously since April 1979, and for years now also on ABC TV 25 in Palm Beach and other networks nationwide. I've had the privilege of interviewing world leaders in a wide range of subjects with a view to promoting peace, friendship and culture, health and positive solutions, all based on true facts and understanding. But here we are now today, witnessing rising anti-Semitism worldwide. We'll hear from Rabbi Marvin Hier and Marc Goldman on this crime perpetrated by misguided, brainwashed and ignorant hypocrites who do not know the truth. Joining us now is Rabbi Marvin Hier. Rabbi, it's an honor and privilege to have you on the Shalom Show.
It's a privilege to be on the show.
Thank you, sir. I just can't believe that the times we are experiencing in history. It's just absolutely incredible to me. If I may say this, my grandfather, Paul Blumenfeld, was a lawyer in Berlin. He was able to send my mother to safety in England, but he and my uncle Richard were killed by the Nazis. So remembrance, accountability, and fighting anti-Semitism are particularly of concern to me, and all of this insane, misguided hatred. Please give us your thoughts on that.
Well, let me say it's absolutely unbelievable. When I went in 1977 to ask permission from Simon Wiesenthal to create the Simon Wiesenthal Center, I asked him the following question. I said, Simon, why do you stay here in Vienna? Why don't you go to the United States? There are so many Jews there that would be helpful to you. And he replied as follows. He said, when you're studying malaria, you want to be where the mosquitoes are. I'm in Vienna because that's where the Nazis are. My point is the following. If Simon Wiesenthal was alive today, unfortunately, he'd say, I must come to the United States of America because that's where the anti-Semites are now.
How do you explain this insanity? You know, it's funny, in the last 80 years, Jews have contributed so much to the world, and the mindlessness of people who blindly hate and are misguided is inconceivable.
Correct. And if I have to say so, I would say the following. Israel, in most of the media, does not get a fair shake. There's a complete discrimination when it comes to the state of Israel. For example, nowhere will you find not a single coverage. This is the 80th anniversary of the Grand Mufti's left, when the Grand Mufti left Palestine, went to Berlin to be at the side of Adolf Hitler, to encourage him to murder all of the Jews. He had a radio broadcast. That was exactly 80 years ago. Not a single newspaper in the world says one word about it. Why not? Because silence from the media. But any other anniversary is widely covered. So when you have that kind of a display, unfair display, we all know, for example, that the New York Times didn't do the right thing during the coverage of the Holocaust. Now they're not doing the right thing again. Any coverage, no one knows that there are 5 million square miles that make up the Arab world. The 22 or 23 countries surrounding the state of Israel live in 5 million square miles. The state of Israel is 8,000 630 square miles, the size of New Jersey, the leaders of the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah in Iran doesn't believe the Holocaust occurred. So what I ask myself is, when you want to make a deal with Iran, and I told this to President Obama when he met with Jewish leaders at the White House.
History can repeat itself, but why are there so many lies by omission disseminated by the media in which the world is lied to, distorting the truth and misguiding the public and inciting hatred? What's behind this?
It's difficult to understand. For example, UNRWA. UNRWA is asleep. The only time UNRWA wakes up is if somebody says something about Israel. Israel, we're at it right away. So UNRWA is supposed to monitor the entire world. All it does is zoom in on Israel. So what is Israel supposed to do? If you have rockets coming in from Gaza with the Iranians' full support of the Iran, so Israel is supposed to, in 8,630 square miles, supposed to say, keep your rockets coming. We're doing nothing, because if we do nothing, UNRWA will love us. It's more, the Jews have learned from the Holocaust. We don't need to be loved. We have a right to live. And we're not going to sacrifice our lives to make UNRWA happy.
It's not just the UN, it is media worldwide, but there are few exceptions. There's a British Colonel, Richard Kemp, who speaks eloquently about the reality of things, and there are many other good people around, but their voices are not heard, are not promoted.
Yeah, that's correct. Look, first of all, most people do not know that Jerusalem is not the center of the Muslim world. The center of the Muslim world is in Mecca. What the world also doesn't know is that in the Quran, not once does the word Jerusalem appear. If Jerusalem is essential to the Arab belief, wouldn't you think that in the Arab, what would be the Arab Bible, the Quran should be everywhere with the word Jerusalem, not once. Whereas in the Torah, the word Jerusalem appears 966 times. So, and as I often say to those who forgot, King David wasn't the king in Spain. Jeremiah didn't live in France. Isaiah didn't live in England. They lived in what is today the Jewish state. Any coverage of history, of world history, of the Bible will clearly tell you that Israel is synonymous with the Jewish people.
And existed 1,300 years before Islam.
Correct. The first quote about that came from Adolf Hitler, where Hitler said in his letter on September the 16th, 1919, that the Jews, it's all about gold. And now we have, it's all about the Benjamins. So you have members of the United States Congress quoting in Congress the words of Adolf Hitler.
Rather astonishing, also considering the fact that he happens to be Jewish himself.
That's correct. It's an embarrassment.
So what do we do, Rabbi? What do we do in this age?
We have to fight back. We have to be very vigilant. We need our politicians, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to take anti-Semitism seriously, to remember that the supreme price that was paid for not paying attention to anti-Semitism was the 6 million Jews that were murdered in the Holocaust, and that we all have an obligation, Jews, Christians, Muslims, to make sure that such an event never occurs again.
Masses that are so horrifically misguided, this is actually nothing less than really dangerous ignorance.
That's correct. If we don't pay attention to the lessons of history, they will repeat themselves. And that will be terrible. So it's up to President Biden, it's up to the other world leaders to see that this is a terrible reoccurrence. We must do everything possible to put it down, and we can't tolerate it. And for the Jewish community, we will, if we're unfortunately during the Holocaust, it took a long time for the Jewish community to be mobilized. We don't want to make that mistake again. When you hear the word Iran, and when you know that their leaders deny the Holocaust, there can be nothing. It's impossible to trust anything the Iranians do. The smartest thing the world can do with the Iranians is to say, if there are 365 days in a year, we want to check what you're doing underground every single day and every single hour. Because if you deny the Holocaust, you're capable of doing anything.
Rabbi, who is funding all this anti-Semitism and hatred? All of these terrorist organizations and all these groups?
Terrorists, they're being funded by the extreme Muslim world. These are the people that are funding it. And you have anti-Semites, and you have people, you have anti-Semites all over the world, and they would support this. But mainly, you have the rich, for example, you have Iran. You have members, the extreme elements in the Arab world. If what would happen if in the United States, Cuba decided one day to fire 1,000 rockets at American cities, and then the United Nations would say to the United States, "Oh, you can't respond. It's ridiculous that you can't respond." Every country in the world would do what Israel did,
and more.
That's correct.
And the media ignores the facts, the atrocities in Syria, Yazidis slaughtered, children, child brides kidnapped.
Yes, and they ignore the fact that the Hamas leadership takes a building and they rent space in the same place with the media. Now, the logical thing for the media to do, if you learn that Hamas has key offices in there, is say, we don't want to be in this building, because if they're planning something against the state of Israel, the Israelis will retaliate. But instead, what happens? They stay in the building, and worse than that, they start reporting, and they report that Israel committed a crime. It defended itself. In other words, you're not allowed to defend yourself.
Totally preposterous and unspeakable. Rabbi, before we conclude, give us a final message.
History tells us the longer we remain apathetic, the more the suffering will go on. We have to respond to evil. Wherever evil exists, it's the requirement of Democrats, Republicans, to basically stand up against this evil. We've paid too high a price for ignoring it in the past, and we don't want to repeat it again in the future.
Absolutely. Rabbi, thank you so very much for being with us today. And let's meet again. Let's meet again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Joining us now is Marc Goldman. Marc, it's good again to have you back on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Richard. I appreciate it.
Even at these troubling times, we just had Rabbi Hier on the show, and I'd like you to comment with regard to what you heard him say.
Well, Rabbi Hier spoke eloquently about so many of the things that are going on currently and the prejudices that are clearly showing up, and the misinformation, disinformation, which is being promulgated. And it's clearly something that has happened all too many times throughout history for thousands of years, since the beginning of the Jewish people. So this is something that we need to be aware of and recognize what we need to do.
He referred a lot to the Holocaust, and I actually, obviously, am particularly concerned with present time. It seems that you'd expect the world to be more educated and more rational and realize all that Israel and Jewish people have contributed in the last 80 odd years since the Holocaust.
Well, if I might take issue with that, because the major contribution of Israel and the fundamental reason why what's happening now has happened so many times in history is because the major contribution of Israel was to be the messengers, and Jewish people to be the messengers of God's message, to explain that there's one God and there's right and there's wrong. Because only when there's that fundamental understanding can civilization take place. Otherwise, it's always strictly survival of the fittest, just like a jungle. So the basic rules of human behavior, which are laid out in the Torah, are the basic rules which every civilization, every society that we look at and we say is civilized, like the Europeans, and of course, like America and some other parts of the world, Australia, are following that basis and those rules. The rest of the world is made up either their own rules, or they say there's no God and they can make up whatever rules they want. And that is the battle that is currently going on in America. Because if there's no truth and if there's no right and wrong, then only what I say counts. And that's no basis to have a civilized behavior.
The only reason I brought up the last 8 years is because people are ignorant and they don't care about history, they don't study, and I thought that they're more attuned to the device they carry in their hand, the computers created by Andy Grove, a Holocaust survivor, the founder of Intel. And the reason I brought that up was simply because I think people should say, hey, we like what the Jewish people have brought to the world. How can we possibly entertain these insane, irrational, evil hatreds?
Well, because we're in this fundamental battle of good and evil, or God or no God. And that's the battle that we're dealing with. So all the things that you're referring to and the contributions that have come to mankind from Israel in medicine, in technology, in so many arenas have been world-changing for the better. And yet those are just not even acknowledged. And again, it goes back to the basic thing, because when you have to play by the rules, then you have to be able to restrain yourself. And the battles that we're facing now are the people who say there shouldn't be any restraint, only my feelings is what counts. And so when that's the battle that we're fighting, then there's no right and wrong.
Is it not a contradiction in terms for people to hate Jewish people, yet they use the products that Jews create? Jonas Salk's polio vaccine, iPhones, computers. It's a contradiction in terms of they don't like Jewish people. They shouldn't use the products Jews create. What do you think?
Well, I mean, maybe we should only allow people that like us to use it. I don't know. I mean, it, of course, but the hypocrisy that we see consistently, we see in every arena, because those who talk about caring about people are the ones who are behaving the most hostile and the most damaging to people in their behaviors. And this whole left push for communism and socialism and government dependency ends up making it, yeah, I guess you could say it makes it fair. Everyone has nothing. But when it's the government that decides right and wrong, then every day the rules change. When God tells us what's right and wrong, then we know there's a fixed set of rules and there's things you can and you cannot do. So clearly, we almost take like we were born knowing that it's not okay to murder and it's not okay to steal. We were not. We needed to be taught that, as well as every other thing that we have learned. So we can't assume that that's just how it is.
Marc, briefly, is this the worst time in history, modern history, in your life, that you are seeing these things happen?
In my life, I am most concerned than I have ever been. I mean, it would be so easy to say, you could look at America and say, how could this possibly even be a conversation in America. I mean, the fundamental foundations, and I think that's, again, the battle that we're dealing with, because the founders of America, and we see it in so much of the founding documents, said it's one nation under God. And so all of the wisdom, and when you really look at the Constitution, you see how the Torah was the source for so much of what's in the Constitution. And the battle is now these people want to take away the Constitution and say it's one nation under government. When you have one nation under government, every day the new rules are whatever you decide. So there's no right and wrong anymore.
What solution would you like to see?
I think the main solution is to educate people on the difference that Judaism has made, and the difference that the understanding that there's one God and that there's absolutely right and wrong. People have to understand that and understand the source of that, because again, that is what enabled civilization to occur. Otherwise, think about the kind of a jungle it is when might makes right.
Marc, speaking of truth and reality, there are so many lies by omission, what is called fake news, media distorting and leading people astray, which is actually dangerous worldwide. The absence of truth. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is a serious problem, and I think it really speaks to exactly what we've been saying, which is the battle is God or no God. And for example, the left is pushing this, the no God people are pushing the agenda that you can decide if you're a boy or a girl. You cannot decide if you're a boy or a girl. You were born a boy. All you have to do is look in your pants, or you were born a girl. All you have to do is look. So there is no in your head deciding these things. And so when they insist that even what's right in front of your face, what's true, and they're saying it's not true, and then that's fake news. I mean, that's as fake news as you can make up. And they are saying that shamelessly, and they're teaching our little kids that that's the way it is. So when they're teaching little kids there's no truth and there's no right and wrong, then God help us.
But in the bigger picture, this affects the world. It affects Israel's survival and civilization.
It affects the entire civilization of the world. They're looking to bring down America. I mean, think about the reality of this. Freedom only exists in the world because of America. America, over the years, over the generations, has been willing to sacrifice the blood and treasure required to hold freedom. I mean, think about the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, the Korean War. I mean, South Korea would not be South Korea if not for America. Japan or Europe would not be what they are if not for America. So that has been the whole difference. And by them looking to do all these things to bring down America, then that is the protector of freedom. And then what's right and wrong is only what a government says. Look in North Korea, what do they say? Look in China, what do they say? Look in Russia, they say whatever they want you to know, and that's as much as you'll get to know.
But a common denominator that could guide the whole world, you believe, is
the Torah. It's not a question of faith. It's a question of knowing. You know, it's very interesting that you say that, because the first commandment is not to believe. The first commandment is to know. It says, I'm the one that took you out of Egypt. You just saw everything that I just did. So you know who it is. It's not a question of believing in anything right in front of your face. So it's not a question of that. Recognize that that's the truth, not your opinion or my opinion. The facts are the facts.
Marc, it's always a pleasure, privilege, and honor to have you on the show.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream, with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
Thank you, the Anti-Defamation League, for this recognition and your work in fighting racism, hate, and bigotry. Take the issue of political ads, on which Facebook have been resolute. Fortunately, Twitter finally banned them. And Google, today I read, is making changes too. But if you pay them, Facebook will run any political ad you want, even if it's a lie. And they'll even help you micro-target those lies to their users for maximum effect. Under this twisted logic, if Facebook were around in the 1930s, it would have allowed Hitler to post 30-second ads on his solution to the Jewish problem. In the end, it all comes down to what kind of world we want. In his speech, Zuckerberg said that one of his main goals is to uphold as wide a definition of freedom of expression as possible. It sounds good. Yet our freedoms are not only an end in themselves, they're also the means to another end. As you say here in the US, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But today, these rights are threatened by hate, conspiracies, and lies. So allow me to leave you with a suggestion for a different aim for society. The ultimate aim of society should be to make sure that people are not targeted, not harassed, and not murdered because of who they are, where they come from, who they love, or how they pray. If we make that our aim, if we prioritize truth over lies, tolerance over prejudice, empathy over indifference, and experts over ignoramuses, then maybe, just maybe, we can stop the greatest propaganda machine in history. We can save democracy, we can still have a place for free speech and free expression, and most importantly, my jokes will still work. Thank you very much.
The preceding program was sponsored by RCP Productions Incorporated and Friends of the Shalom Show.